Hello, and welcome, dear listeners, to Hazardous Tales, a series in which I, your humble narrator, entertain you with stories of love and loss, hope and terror, moments of heart-pounding action, or tragic tales of woe. Have you ever had an unexplainable, life-changing experience? Something so incomprehensible that it took a hold of your soul and shook you to your core. What would you do after that experience? Who could you tell that would believe you? Do you live with this knowledge while everyone remains ignorant, or do you double down, dig in your heels, and prove the non-believers wrong? Our story today is about one such individual, a man of unfortunate fate whose life was ruined by the supernatural, now obsessed with proving the existence of the mystical and strange. However, this road would lead to dangers he was not prepared for. Somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, amid a dark forest under a bright full moon, a man sits at the edge of a tree line, overlooking a small, empty, moonlit clearing. He is tall, thin, some would even call him gaunt, his blue eyes dim and sunken from too much missleep, and dark, unkempt hair, along with a thick stubble on his chin. Dressed in the most expensive camo he could afford, dollar store polyester blend, the man waits patiently for something that even he doubts would show. He calls himself James Eldritch, a nom de guerre he had given himself partly due to paranoia, as he has read more than once that true names have power. And he hunts monsters. Well, hunt may not be the most accurate term. Preternatural investigator is the title he'd prefer. It's somewhat more accurate to what he does and sounds more professional. Something he could put on a business card, if he was someone who could afford business cards. That's half the reason he's squatting in the cold, damp underbrush in the middle of nowhere. The rumor is that the legendary Bigfoot could be seen wandering around these parts, and James knew some people who would pay a pretty penny for half-decent footage. Then maybe he could afford those business cards, and eat more than once every other day. The other reason was far more concerning. As a proper investigator of the preternatural, James kept his ears to the ground and eyes on several conspiracy sites for anything unusual or unnatural, and as such, he found out about a new popular Bigfoot sighting area here in the Pacific Northwest. That's honestly not unusual in this area of the U.S., but in this case, not everyone has come back. Unsurprisingly, not too many people were willing to talk to a disheveled man showing up unannounced to their door, but the few that did gave accounts that were unsettling. Some were just hoping to get a glimpse of the creature and ran at the sound of a roar. Others swear on their mother's grave they saw the Sasquatch chase them through the forest, even when they were speeding down the dirt roads in their cars. And then there's Bill. A few months back, Bill had taken his fiancée, Cheryl, camping. They had a fondness of weird urban legends and folklore, and were hoping to catch a glimpse of the myth. Unfortunately, Bill was the only one who came back. He burst into a ranger station covered in blood, screaming nigh incomprehensible nonsense about something that took his fiancée away. The rangers, park services, as well as several volunteers spent weeks looking for Cheryl, finding only parts of her, and assumed she was the victim of a bear attack. At least that's what James was able to glean from official sources before talking to the man himself. When James met with Bill, he wasn't doing well. He was practically comatose, sitting in a dark, empty room, staring at the floor, pale face, bags under his eyes from so many sleepless nights. He barely acknowledged the investigator's presence when James tried to talk to him, only giving grunts in response to his many questions. "I'm sorry for bringing up, difficult memories," James apologized. "They said it was a bear, but—" "I know what they said!" Bill shouted, swiftly rising out of his seat, as if all the resentment and anger that had been bubbling inside him finally burst. "But I know what I saw," he hissed. "There was no bear. There was... I don't know what it was. But if you saw it, looked into its eyes, you'd know that it was a creature never meant to be. That's ultimately what led James here, squatting between the bushes. Almost everything he heard could have a reasonable explanation, but Bill's fear seemed sincere. That whatever happened shook that man to his core, be it Sasquatch or not. Something was out there waiting, and our cold, starving investigator was hoping to find it. The plan itself was simple, but hopefully effective, as James had set out a bait trap within the clearing. Though many were willing to share their opinions online, there was no real consensus to baiting a Sasquatch, so James just took his best guess and plopped various bits of meat, fish, and berries onto the field. It'll either attract his prey or a bear. Probably a bear. As he waited, sitting in the dark, it gave him plenty of time to think about his life choices. Too much time. James didn't like dwelling on the many mistakes he's made in his life. All the missed opportunities, all the bogus hunts, of all those horrible nights of being tormented back home. At the end of the day, that's really what started his downward spiral. James had been haunted, tormented by a spirit every night throughout his childhood. Of course, no one believed him, and years of a haunting becoming progressively worse drove his family apart. It's what sent him down this occult rabbit hole, looking at every book he could get his hands on, every internet article that he hoped had a sliver of truth in it, trying to find any shred of a real, tangible proof of the supernatural. Anything to prove he wasn't crazy. After years of diving headfirst into the mystical and weird, James Eldritch, preternatural investigator, has found absolutely nothing. No boogeymen under the bed, no vampires crawling out of the shadows or werewolves howling at the moon. He wasted his younger years in an attempt to be vindicated, and now he sits alone in the dark, broke and bitter on a last-ditch effort for validation and cash. After some time situated on the frigid ground, questioning his life choices, he heard the loud crack of a twig being snapped. James brought his attention past the clearing to the other tree line, camera at the ready with night vision on, and a backup standing by. He could see movement in the darkness of the underbrush, but when looking through his camera he saw nothing but the gloom of the forest. It was probably nothing more than a deer passing by. Sighing, the investigator continued his vigil. "What are you?" A deep rumbling voice echoed in his ear. James's heart nearly stopped, and he practically jumped out of his own skin, dropping his camera in the process. Falling to the ground, he grasped for it, but found nothing. He couldn't take his eyes off the creature that suddenly appeared before him, lest it make any sudden movements. The thing was obscured by the shadows of the forest, but James could tell it was humanoid in shape. Two arms that ended in large, grasping claws lay limply at its side. Its engorged, misshapen legs looked like they could barely support the creature's massive stature, and the thing had thin wisps of hair on its head. It seemed to be dressed in what looked like tattered, stained hiking clothes that barely fit on top of its large frame. However, it was the eyes that disturbed him the most. They were human-like, although the iris had a bright red hue, but they were also a little too wide, too far apart, too big, and he was unnerved by how the moonlight made them shine in the night. After a few more seconds of fumbling, James grasped his camcorder and quickly brought it to his eye, the investigator still hoping to record something before its inevitable demise. However, when watching through its lens, he saw nothing more than distorted static. His disappointment was palpable, but not unexpected. He has read many claims about how some denizens of the night could have a negative effect on recording equipment. The creature took a stumbling step forward, unsteady on its disproportionate legs. It gave James just enough time to stand, but instead of listening to his common sense screaming at him to run, he hit record on the digital tape recorder in his pocket. He was desperate for something, anything to use as evidence. This was the find of a lifetime. He needed to get it to speak again, to record its unearthly sounds, and if it was intelligent, maybe get some answers. Regrettably, after staring at its monstrous unnatural form and cold dead eyes, all he could manage was, Hi. Hi. The hulking monstrosity repeated back to him, in the exact same tone and cadence as the investigator. It was unnerving hearing his own voice come from such a creature. James wondered if this was how it communicated. Did it actually understand what it was saying? James took a single sidestep, and the creature matched his movements, seemingly ready to pounce, but didn't. Maybe it did want to communicate. Hoping that keeping it talking would give him time to think of an escape plan, as well as giving him the evidence he desperately craved, James steeled himself and pressed his questions further. Could you tell me what you are? Why you're here? It cocked its head to the side, as if confused by the question, giving James a few precious seconds to grab a small bag of powdered silver in his pocket, and much to his surprise, he was given an answer. No. Yes. It responded, but not in one voice. Its speech was a collection of many tongues, the sounds of men, women, young, old, even children would each speak a different word. Not home. Strange place. Strange trees. Strange people. But can't go home. So I survive. And with that statement, the monster's jaw unhinged, revealing a horrific mass of razor-like teeth rushing James at full speed. In response, James tossed a bag of the powdered silver in its gaping maw, which did absolutely nothing. Cursing every internet search engine and every supposed occult expert, he ran as fast as his wiry legs could take him. While rushing through the trees and bushes, he pulled out what he called his ring of protection, which was a key ring with various holy symbols, good luck charms, and other such talismans he was told would bring protection and fortune. Dragging out the standard cross, he spun around, planted his feet, and held it on high towards the beast. The creature completely disregarded the cross, and its claw took a hold of James's arm in a vice-like grip. He could see its sharp, jagged teeth glinting in the moonlight, and smell the horrid stench coming from the thing's gaping maw. James was prepared to take photos of Bigfoot, not get locked in a life-or-death struggle with a human blender. His other little tricks weren't working either. Whatever this thing is, it's not following the rules of any supernatural creature he's read about, and he's running out of time. Fortunately, the investigator had one last desperate stunt, though it was something he was hoping to never use. Put gun sound effect here. He pulled out a .375 Magnum and fired it with his one free hand, and it nearly broke his gangly arm in the process. James didn't know much about guns, and proved it, as he wasn't prepared for the recoil, which made him lose his grip of the weapon, the Magnum becoming lost among the long grass. But at that moment, he was grateful for just hitting its target. It was enough for the clawed hand to loosen its grip, letting him once again sprint away. He had to get back to his car. It was his only option for survival. As James dashed through the forest, it was like his lungs, leg, shoulder, hell, it felt like his whole body was on fire. But the fear of evisceration was far greater than any pain he was feeling. Then he saw his faint glimmer of hope. He could see his car through the trees, and he had never been so happy to see a rusted hatchback. However, that dream of safety, like so many other dreams in his life, were torn asunder when, as if from the shadows themselves, stepped out his pursuer. Don't. Run! Don't. Leave me. James was at a loss. From faulty superstition to brute force, nothing worked. And so he stood there, frozen, helpless, silent, closing his eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But the inevitable never came. The investigator tentatively opened a single eye, and was greeted with a mangled, lopsided face full of teeth. But instead of ripping him apart, it looked almost confused, as if it wasn't looking at him, but the area around him. After getting an eyeful of that horrendous visage is when he noticed its eyes were dull, lifeless things. Maybe they weren't really eyes at all, just another way to look more human from a distance to its prey. It could be that it hunts by sound or movement. If that's the case, the young investigator went from no options to one. Carefully, ever so slightly, while the monster's claws swayed just inches away from his face, he pulled out his tape recorder. He hit play and with a quick flick of his wrist, tossed it into the dark underbrush. The monster tracked its movement. Could you tell me what you are? The tape repeated. Upon hearing the voice, the creature rushed off into that same darkness, and James, seeing his only chance, hurried to his car. Practically diving into the vehicle, he rammed his keys into the ignition. "Please work, please work, please work," he kept muttering to himself, desperate not to hit another horror movie cliché. He turned the key. The engine roared to life, and James afforded himself a moment to breathe a sigh of relief, which was a mistake. There was a blood-curdling screech as the back of his hatchback was ripped apart by a giant claw, which signaled for him to slam that pedal to the floor and get his ass out of there, leaving whatever that was and the tailgate of his car alone in the night. It took him several days to get back home, and some awfully long, sleepless nights. No matter what motel he was at, regardless of the supposed safety of the cities, he laid awake watching. When he finally returned to his dilapidated home, all he could think of was how everything about this case was a bust. Lost all of his equipment and evidence, so back to being broke, not to mention that he barely made it out alive. But he experienced it. A true preternatural creature, and in that experience he felt oddly justified that he wasn't crazy or delusional. Ever since that haunting destroyed his life, James had been looking for something, anything, to prove that there were things beyond the veil. To prove it wasn't his fault. And James found it. Something truly unexplainable existed in our world. Not little whispers of an abandoned house spook, nor the rumors of some conspiracy blog. Not something that would make people question his sanity. It was something real. Hell, if that's out there, maybe there is a Bigfoot. Or that thing ate Bigfoot. And Cheryl. And how many others like her? How many others have been traumatized, like Bill? How many times is someone going to lose a loved one due to a bear attack that no one will do anything about? He fervently started writing down notes of his encounter and planned for the next. He wasn't giving up. Not yet. James Eldridge may be a preternatural investigator, but he also hunts monsters. So, how did you enjoy that tale? If I may, sort of break character for a moment for this very first episode, I'm very much aware that I'm an amateur writer, artist, and I guess voice actor guy, but my goal is to improve, and to share my gradual improvement with all of you, and hopefully entertain you with that journey, as I do have several more tales planned in addition to other types of content for this channel. So I would ask that you leave a comment below of any constructive criticisms you may have of the story, if you're willing. Hearing about anything you might have liked would be nice, if you're willing to do that too. But any sincere comment, whether it's positive or negative, is appreciated, as well as the usual YouTube thing of leaving a like if you liked it or a dislike if you didn't. And if you wish to hear more tales and help the channel grow, please consider subscribing. Farewell, and I hope to see you for the next tale.